Widow inherits farm with a crater, but what she found inside. Sarah Mitchell held the yellowed paper between her trembling hands, while her 3 small children played on the dirt floor of the small rented house. The letter from the lawyer had arrived 3 weeks after her husband David's funeral, bringing news she never expected to hear. "Mum, what is that?" asked Emily, her 8-year-old daughter, pointing to the document Sarah was reading for the 10th time that morning. "It's about a property your father left for us, my dear," Sarah replied, still trying to process the information. David had never mentioned owning a farm in rural Kentucky. Little Nathan, 5 years old, dropped his improvised toys and approached his mother. In her lap, baby Ethan slept peacefully, unaware of the worries that had plagued the family since David passed. "But Daddy never talked about any farm," Emily insisted, always observant for her age. Sarah took a deep breath. The bills were piling up on the small living room table, and the money David left would barely cover 2 more months of rent. This mysterious inheritance could be the answer to their problems, or just another complication in her already difficult life. "We'll have to go there and see what it is, Emily. It might be our salvation." 3 days later, Sarah packed the family's few belongings onto the bus that would take them to White Rock, a small town in rural Kentucky where, according to the documents, the inherited property was located. The 6-hour journey felt eternal, with Ethan crying from time to time and Nathan asking every kilometer when they would arrive. "Look, Mom," Emily pointed out the window when the bus finally stopped in the central square of White Rock. "It's really small, huh?" The town was indeed tiny. A few simple houses surrounded a small white church, and a handful of businesses completed the scene. Sarah got off with the children and the luggage, feeling the weight of the curious stares from the local residents. "Are you the widow of David Mitchell?" asked a thin man who approached as soon as they stepped into the square. "Yes, I am." "And you are—" "Joe Anderson, local realtor. I heard you inherited the late David's farm. Look, I'll be direct. That property isn't worth anything. If you want, I'll buy it for a fair price just so you don't have the headache." Sarah was suspicious of the man's haste. She hadn't even arrived properly and they already wanted her to sell everything. Something didn't smell right about this situation. "Thank you, Mr. Joe, but first I need to see the property. Where is it exactly?" The man's expression closed off a little. "It's about 15 kilometers from here, on the Mountain Ridge Road. But look, you'd better not even bother going there. The land is bad, dry. There's a crater right in the middle that makes everything useless." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "A crater?" Sarah asked, interested. "Yeah, it appeared out of nowhere about 5 years ago. The old residents say the land has been cursed ever since. That's why I say it's better to sell quickly and leave." Emily discreetly tugged on her mother's skirt. The girl had inherited her father's sharp intuition, and something about that conversation wasn't right. Sarah noticed her daughter's signal. "Even so, I want to see the property. How do I get there?" Mr. Joe hesitated before answering. "There's a bus that passes by there at 2 in the afternoon, but I insist, Mrs. Sarah, it's a waste of time." After the realtor walked away, Sarah approached an elderly lady selling fruit at a nearby stall. "Excuse me, did you know my husband, David Mitchell?" The woman raised her tired eyes and studied Sarah's face for a few seconds. "Yes, I did, my dear. He was a good man, a hard worker. I always came here to buy fruit when I visited the property. Such a shame what happened to him. Do you know anything about his farm?" The fruit seller looked around to make sure no one was listening. "I know your David was messing with some things out there, digging, researching. He said he was going to turn that dry land into something prosperous. Folks around here thought he was crazy, but I saw determination in his eyes." Sarah felt her heart race. For the first time since receiving the news of the inheritance, a spark of hope ignited in her chest. "And about the crater that Mr. Joe mentioned?" "Oh, that." The woman lowered her voice even further. "It did appear about 5 years ago, really big, but I don't think it was an accident. Mr. David was always walking around there with some tools, measuring things, writing in notebooks. It was like he knew something nobody else did. The afternoon bus bounced along the dirt road leading to the property. Sarah held Ethan on her lap, while Emily and Nathan watched the arid landscape through the window. The vegetation was sparse, the sun relentless, and the overall impression was of land punished by drought. "Mom, is this where we're going to live?" Nathan asked with some apprehension in his voice. "I don't know yet, son. We'll see how things are." The bus stopped on an even dustier side road. "This is it, Mrs. Mitchell," said the driver. "The property is about 2 kilometers down this trail. Are you sure you want to get off here with the children?" Sarah looked at her children, and then at the trail stretching ahead, disappearing over a rise in the land. "Yes, I'm sure. Thank you very much." The walk was difficult, especially with Ethan on her hip and the luggage. Nathan complained a few times about the heat, but Emily proved determined, helping to carry some smaller bags. When they finally reached the top of the rise, Sarah stopped abruptly. Before her stretched a property of considerable size, with a simple wooden house at its center. But what really caught the eye was the enormous crater that opened in the middle of the land like a wound in the earth. "Wow, Mom! Look at the size of that hole!" Nathan exclaimed, impressed. The crater was at least 20 meters in diameter and seemed quite deep. Around it, the earth was even drier and more barren than the rest of the property. "How strange," Emily murmured. "Why is there such a big hole in the middle of our land?" Sarah carefully approached the edge of the crater, keeping the children at a safe distance. Down at the bottom, she could see only dark earth and some rocks, nothing that explained why David would have been so interested in this property. The house, when they entered, was dusty but in reasonable condition. 2 small bedrooms, a living room, a simple kitchen, and a basic bathroom. In the kitchen drawers, Sarah found some utensils left by her husband, along with candles and matches. "At least we have a place to sleep tonight," she said, more to herself than to the children. While Sarah cleaned what she could and organized their few clothes, Emily explored the house with curiosity. In the larger bedroom, under the bed, she found a small wooden box. "Mom, there's a box here." Sarah opened the box carefully. Inside were some photographs of the property taken at different times, showing the evolution of the crater over the months. There was also a notebook in David's handwriting, full of notes and drawings she couldn't understand. "What did Dad write there?" Emily asked, trying to read over her mother's shoulder. "They're notes about measurements, distances, something about groundwater. I don't really understand." That first night on the property, Sarah could hardly sleep. The children were tired from the journey and fell asleep quickly, but she lay awake thinking about what to do. The money was running out, there were no jobs in White Rock, and all she owned now was a seemingly unproductive piece of land with a mysterious crater in the middle. The next morning, she woke to Emily gently shaking her shoulder. "Mom, there's someone outside." Sarah got up quickly and looked out the window. A middle-aged man was walking toward the house carrying a leather briefcase. "Good morning," he greeted as Sarah went out to meet him. "I'm Richard Mitchell, David's brother." Sarah felt her blood run cold. David had never mentioned having a brother, and now he showed up right after she arrived at the property. "Brother, David never spoke of you." Richard gave an awkward smile. "Yeah, we hadn't spoken in a long time. We had some disagreements about this property, actually. I came here because I heard you inherited everything and wanted to talk about an offer." "What kind of offer?" "Look, Sarah, I'll be frank. This land here is worthless. My brother spent the last years of his life obsessed with this crater. I tried to get him to give it up, but he wouldn't listen. Now you're left holding the bag." Richard opened the briefcase and took out some papers. "I have a purchase offer for the land here. The amount isn't high, but at least you'll be free of this headache and can start fresh somewhere else." Sarah took the papers and quickly examined them. The offered amount would barely cover a few months' rent in a small town. "Why is everyone in such a hurry to make me sell this property? Yesterday it was the town realtor, today it's you." "Because we know what's best for you," Richard replied, with a hint of impatience in his voice. "You have no experience with land. You don't know the area. You have no money to invest. It's best to cut your losses." Emily appeared in the doorway, watching the conversation intently. Sarah noticed her daughter didn't seem to trust the newcomer. "I'll think about the offer," Sarah said diplomatically. "I need a few days to decide." Richard's face hardened. Sarah, this is a one-time opportunity. If you don't accept now, another interested party might not come along. Even so, I need to think. After Richard left, Sarah sat on the house's porch looking at the crater. Emily approached and sat beside her. Mom, I didn't like that man. Why, honey? He said Dad was obsessed, but if Dad thought it was worth working on this land, it's because there was something important here. Dad didn't do things without a reason. Sarah smiled. Her daughter had truly inherited her father's intelligence. You're right, Emily. Your father always had his reasons for everything. Let's find out what he was looking for here. That afternoon, while Nathan played with Ethan in the shade of the house, Sarah and Emily explored David's notebook more thoroughly. The drawings seemed to indicate precise measurements of the crater, as if he were mapping something specific. Mum, look at this page. Emily pointed to a drawing showing cross-sections of the crater. Dad drew it as if there was something underground. Sarah examined the drawing more carefully. David had made several notes about depth, excavation angles, and even specific times of day for certain observations. It seems like he was following some kind of scientific method, Sarah murmured. And there's this. Emily flipped a few pages until she found a different note. It says Project Hope Spring and has a date from 3 years ago. Sarah felt a chill. David had started that project long before saying anything to her about the property. Why had he kept it all a secret? At that moment, they heard the sound of a car approaching. Coming down the dusty road was a white pickup truck with a company logo Sarah didn't recognize. Valley Waters LLC, Emily read aloud as the vehicle stopped in front of the house. 2 men in suits stepped out of the car, looking out of place in that rural setting. The taller one approached with a professional smile plastered on his face. Good afternoon, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm Andrew Wilson, manager of Valley Waters. This is our operating region, and we heard you recently inherited this property. Good afternoon. How can I help you? Actually, we want to help you. We know about the difficulties this land presents, especially because of the crater affecting the entire local water system. Our company would like to make an offer to acquire the property. Sarah crossed her arms. Another purchase offer. How interesting that everyone wants this land that's supposedly worthless. Andrew hesitated for a second before responding. Well, it's not exactly that the land is worthless. It's that it presents complex environmental problems that require technical expertise to solve. Our company has that expertise. What kind of environmental problems? The crater affects the regional water table. It can cause contamination, soil destabilization, various risks that an ordinary family isn't equipped to manage properly. Emily discreetly tugged her mother's blouse. When Sarah looked down, the girl pointed to David's notebook, which was open to the page for the Spring of Hope project. Interesting, Sarah said, looking directly at Andrew. My husband was working on a project related to groundwater here. Did you know about his work? Andrew's expression changed instantly. Your husband was meddling with things he didn't fully understand. Unfortunately, that may have worsened the problems I mentioned. Are you saying my husband caused environmental damage? I'm not accusing anyone of anything, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm just offering a solution so you and your children don't have to deal with these complications. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. First the unknown brother-in-law dismissing David's work, now these businessmen making insinuations about her husband. I appreciate the offer, but I don't intend to sell. Mrs. Mitchell, be reasonable. You don't have the resources to solve this property's problems. We offer a fair price and even assume all environmental responsibility. I said I don't intend to sell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do. After the men left, Sarah sat in the kitchen with David's notebook open in front of her. The children played in the backyard, and the afternoon silence gave her a chance to think. Why did so many people want to buy supposedly worthless land? And why did everyone mention problems with the crater, but no one explained exactly what those problems were? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the late afternoon, Sarah decided to visit town to try to understand the situation better. She left the children with a neighbor who offered to help and took the bus back to White Rock. In the central square, She looked for the fruit vendor who had spoken with David. "Mrs. Margaret, can I ask you some questions about my husband and the property?" "Of course, dear. Sit here and we'll talk. Do you know if my husband had any problems with the Valley Waters Company?" Mrs. Margaret's face immediately closed off. "Oh dear, that company is a plague in this region. They control almost all the water supply around here, charge what they want, make the rules they want. Your David didn't like them at all. Why? Because he said they were hiding things from the people, that the water scarcity in the region wasn't natural, that it had to do with their commercial interests." Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. What kind of interests? Mr. David always said that whoever controls the water controls the entire region. He thought Valley Waters LLC was manipulating the supply to maintain their monopoly. "And about the crater on our property?" "Look, my dear, I don't understand much about these technical things, but Mr. David explained to me once that that crater didn't appear by chance. He thought it had been made on purpose a long time ago and was later abandoned." "Made for what?" "To access groundwater. He said that beneath that land there's a natural spring that was sealed up decades ago." Sarah felt her heart race. Natural spring. That's what David was looking for. That's why everyone wanted to buy the property. "Mrs. Margaret, do you know anyone who could help me understand these technical questions about water and land?" "Yes, I do. There's Mr. Anthony Turner, retired, who worked his whole life in engineering. He lives on the street behind the church in a blue house. He's a good man, was a friend of Mr. David's. Sarah found the blue house easily. Mr. Anthony was a man of about 60, with greying hair and hands calloused from a lifetime of work." "You're David's wife," he said as soon as Sarah introduced herself. "I was expecting you to show up." "You knew my husband?" "I knew him and greatly admired his work. David was a visionary man. He knew that property held a hidden treasure." "Treasure?" Mr. Anthony gestured for her to come inside. "Water, my dear. The most valuable treasure that exists in a dry region like this. Sit here. I'm going to explain something important to you." In the simple but tidy living room, Mr. Anthony spread some papers on the table. "David showed me this research he was doing. Look here. More than 50 years ago, that region where your property is located had a very strong natural spring. That's where the water for this whole area came from. And what happened to the spring?" "Economic interests, my dear. At the time, the owner of the neighboring lands wanted to use all the water to irrigate a coffee plantation. He sealed the spring with earth and stones to divert the flow to his side." Sarah felt the puzzle pieces falling into place. "But is that legal, sealing a natural spring?" "Back then it was common. There wasn't as much oversight as today. But the problem is that when you interfere with the natural flow of a large spring, the entire region suffers the consequences." "Is that why the land here is so dry?" "Exactly. And that's why the Valley Water Company got the monopoly in the region. With the spring sealed, they became the only reliable water source for the population." Sarah felt indignation growing in her chest. "So they know about the spring on my property?" "Yes, they do. And they know that if it's unblocked, they lose control over the entire region. That's why they're desperate to buy your land." "Mr. Anthony, is it possible to unblock a spring that was sealed so long ago?" The man smiled. "It's difficult, but possible. David was very close to succeeding when he passed. If you want, I can help finish his work." "Why would you do that?" "Because I believe in David's project, and because at 65 I've seen a lot of injustice in this world. It would be good to be able to help correct one of them." Sarah returned to the property that night with a completely different feeling. Now she understood why David had kept everything a secret, why so many people wanted to buy the land, and what the true value was of what she had inherited. The children were already asleep when she arrived. She sat on the porch looking at the crater under the starlight, and for the first time since she had arrived there, she felt hope. The next morning, she woke to a strange noise coming from outside. Through the window, she saw a man poking around near the crater with an iron bar. "Hey, what are you doing on my property?" she shouted, quickly leaving the house. The man turned around. It was Richard, the supposed brother-in-law, and he had a far from friendly expression on his face. "I'm trying to do what my brother should have done. Seal this crater once and for all before it causes an accident. You have no right to touch anything here. Yes, I do. As David's brother, I have rights to this property too. Sarah felt her anger boil. If you have rights, why didn't you say so yesterday? Why did you offer money to buy the land? Richard dropped the iron bar and approached her. Because I'm trying to avoid a bigger problem. You don't understand the forces involved in this. If you keep messing with this crater, you'll get into a mess you won't be able to get out of. What kind of mess? Valley Waters LLC doesn't play around, Sarah. They have a lot of power in the region, a lot of influence if you interfere with their business. Are you threatening me? I'm trying to open your eyes. David was too stubborn to listen to advice, and look how that turned out. Emily appeared at the door of the house, drawn by the argument. Mom, is everything okay? Yes, sweetheart. Mr. Richard was just leaving. Richard looked at the girl and then back at Sarah. You have young children, Sarah. Think carefully about what's best for them before you make any rash decisions. After he left, Sarah sat in the kitchen trembling with anger and fear. For the first time, she began to understand the scale of what David had discovered and why he had kept it all a secret. Mom, why was that man arguing with you? Emily asked, sitting down beside her. He doesn't want us to touch the crater, sweetie. Why? Sarah looked at her 8-year-old daughter and made a decision. Emily was smart, observant, and deserved to know the truth about her father's project. Emily, do you want to know what your father was really doing here? The girl nodded enthusiastically. Your father discovered that beneath our land there's a water spring, a very important spring that could help this whole region. But some people don't want us to find that water. Why? Because if we find the spring, other people will lose a lot of money. Emily was thoughtful for a few minutes. Mom, are we going to continue Daddy's work? Sarah looked out the window toward the crater. It was a decision that would completely change their lives. It could work out and solve all their problems, or it could bring more trouble than they could handle. Yes, Emily, we are going to finish what your father started. That afternoon, Sarah walked into town to find Mr. Anthony. She needed technical help, but mostly she needed someone she could trust. Mr. Anthony, will you help me with the spring project? The man smiled. Of course, my dear. When do we start? Now. But I need to warn you that some people have already tried to discourage me. There might be resistance. Sarah, I'm 65 years old. If I haven't learned how to handle resistance by now, I never will. Besides, my late wife always said the best projects are the ones that bother the people who shouldn't be bothered. They arranged for Mr. Anthony to come to the property the next morning to examine the work David had started and plan the next steps. That night, Sarah put the children to bed and sat on the porch with David's notebook. For the first time, she could understand the logic behind her husband's notes. She had carefully mapped the entire area, identifying specific points where the groundwater was closest to the surface. One drawing in particular caught her attention. David had made a diagram showing how the water naturally flowed underground before the spring was sealed. The arrows indicated that the main flow passed right under the crater. That's why he dug exactly there, Sarah murmured to herself. She was so focused on the notebook that she almost didn't notice the sound of footsteps approaching the house. When she looked up, she saw a silhouette moving furtively near the crater. Her first impulse was to shout, but something made her hesitate. Whoever it was trying not to be seen, and that meant they were probably doing something they shouldn't. Sarah stood up silently and moved closer to the children's bedroom window for a better view. In the moonlight, she could make out two figures fiddling with something near the edge of the crater. Her heart raced. Were they sabotaging something? Trying to seal the crater? Or perhaps they were looking for something David had hidden there. She waited until the figures were gone before daring to go outside. With a borrowed flashlight, she walked to the crater to see what had happened. On the northern edge of the excavation, she found obvious signs that someone had recently disturbed the soil. Several large stones had been pushed toward the hole, as if to start sealing it. They're trying to undo David's work, she said to herself, but there was something more. Near the stones, she found a tool the saboteurs had dropped, a small folding shovel with the initials VW engraved on the handle. Valley Waters, Sarah whispered. Now she was sure who was behind the sabotage attempts. The company wasn't just interested in buying the property, it was actively trying to stop her from discovering the spring. The next morning, Mr. Anthony arrived early, carrying a box with tools and measuring equipment. "Good morning, Sarah. I brought some things that will help us better understand what we have here." Sarah told him about the previous night's incident and showed him the shovel with the company's initials. "Doesn't surprise me," Mr. Anthony said, examining the tool. "They know their days are numbered. If we find the spring, we'll have to work with extra caution." "How so?" "We'll work during the day, when there's more traffic on the road, and they're less likely to attempt sabotage. And we'll document everything, take photos, keep records. If they try anything against us, we'll have proof." Mr. Anthony went down into the crater with measuring equipment and spent the whole morning taking surveys. Emily watched, fascinated, while Nathan played with Ethan in the shade. "What are you measuring, sir?" the girl asked. "I'm seeing how the water is flowing underground, little one. Your father did an excellent job mapping it all. Now I need to confirm some of his measurements." By late morning, Mr. Anthony emerged from the crater with an excited expression. "Sarah, your husband was absolutely right. The spring is right here, practically under our feet. And from the pressure I'm measuring, it must be a very strong spring." "Is that good?" "It's great. It means that when we manage to clear the flow, there will be enough water not only for your property but for several neighboring lands." "And how do we clear it?" "First, we need to identify exactly where the blockage is. Then, we'll have to dig very carefully so as not to damage the source. It's delicate work, but possible." That afternoon, as Mr. Anthony finished his measurements, Sarah noticed movement on the road. A Valley Waters pickup truck was parked at the entrance to the property, and two men were watching the work with binoculars. "Mr. Anthony, I think we have unwanted visitors." The man looked in the direction Sarah was pointing. "Let them look. We're not doing anything illegal. In fact, I'm going over there to talk to them." "Are you sure, sir?" "I am. It's better to make it clear from the start that we're not afraid of them." Mr. Anthony walked toward the pickup truck with the confidence of someone who had dealt with difficult situations his entire life. Sarah watched from the porch as he talked with the men from the company. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and Sarah could see the tone was tense. The men from Valley Waters gestured a lot, apparently trying to intimidate Mr. Anthony. But the retired engineer stood firm, not letting it shake him. When the pickup truck left, Mr. Anthony returned with a serious expression. "So?" Sarah asked. "They wanted to know what kind of work we're doing here." "I said we're doing research on soil and water resources, which is true." "And did they accept the explanation?" "They said they'll check if we have all the necessary permits for this type of activity. It's a bluff, of course. For basic research on private property, you don't need a special permit. But they're trying to scare us." "And now?" "Now we speed up the work. The faster we find the spring, the harder it will be for them to interfere with us." In the following days, Sarah, Mr. Anthony, and even Emily worked together exploring the crater and mapping the underground water system. Nathan helped by carrying small tools, while Ethan slept in the shade of the house. It was Emily who made the first important discovery. While playing near the southern edge of the crater, she noticed something different in the earthen wall. "Mr. Anthony, look at this. It looks like there's something buried." The engineer approached to examine what the girl had found. There was indeed something of a different shape, partially buried in the crater wall. "Sarah, bring the small shovel. Let's see what this is." Carefully, they began digging around the object. In a short time, they managed to free what appeared to be a rusty metal plate. "It's an old plaque," Mr. Anthony said, cleaning the rust with a brush. "There's something written here." When he managed to clean it sufficiently, they could read a nearly faded inscription: "St. Helena Spring, 1954. "St. Helena," Sarah repeated. Was that the name of the spring? Apparently so. And look, there's something else written underneath. "Property of the Shepherd family." Shepherd? Who were the Shepherds? Mr. Anthony thought for a few minutes. "I vaguely remember that name. I think they were the original owners of this area before selling to other people. We'll have to research them more." "Why is that important?" "Because if they were the original owners of the spring, there might be historical documents proving it existed and was improperly sealed. That would strengthen our legal position. That afternoon, Sarah decided to go to town to research the Shepherd family. She left the children with Mr. Anthony and headed to the small records office in White Rock. The clerk, an elderly man with thick glasses, became interested when Sarah mentioned the name Shepherd. Shepherd family. I haven't heard that name in a long time. They were pioneers here in the region, owned a lot of land. But they lost everything in a complicated legal case about 4 decades ago. Legal case? A dispute over water rights, if I'm not mistaken. There was a conflict between them and a company that wanted to exploit the region's water resources. The Shepherds lost and ended up having to sell everything. Sarah felt a chill. Do you remember which company it was? The clerk went to an old file and returned with a dusty folder. Let me see here. Ah, yes. It was the Valley Water Company. I think it later changed its name to Valley Waters. The same company that operates in the region today? The same. They acquired the rights to almost all the water sources in the area through that purchase of the Shepherd family's land. Sarah left the notary's office with her head buzzing with information. Valley Waters had taken the spring from the original family through a legal dispute and now was trying to do the same thing to her. But there was one important difference. David had bought the property directly from a descendant of the Shepherds without going through the company. That meant she had legitimate rights to the spring the company thought it controlled. When she returned to the property, she found her Anthony very excited. Sarah, you need to see what we found. What is it? Emily found something else in the crater. Come see. Sarah followed her Anthony to the excavation, where Emily was excitedly pointing at something she had found. Mom, look, they're very old pipes. In the crater wall, partially buried, were remnants of what were clearly old pipes made of a metal Sarah didn't recognize. They're cast iron pipes, her Anthony explained. They were used in the spring's water distribution system. This proves there really was an organized facility here. And where did these pipes take the water? Let's follow them and find out. In the following hours, they carefully mapped the path of the old pipes. Most were buried, but in some spots, they could identify the route the pipeline followed. Look here, her Anthony said, pointing in a specific direction. The pipes go exactly toward the neighboring properties. The spring fed several lands at the same time. Does that mean if we can reactivate the spring, it won't just benefit our property? Exactly. It will benefit the whole region. And it also means we have potential allies among the neighbors. Sarah decided it was time to talk to the owners of the nearby lands. If everyone would benefit from the spring's reactivation, perhaps they could work together against the pressure from Valley Waters. The next morning she visited the nearest property, where an elderly couple lived, Mr. Jack and Mrs. Rose. Good morning. I'm Sarah Mitchell, the new owner of the land with the crater. Oh, David's widow, Mrs. Rose said warmly. Come in, dear, let's talk. Did you know my husband? We did, Mr. Jack replied. He was a good man, always polite. He would come by here sometimes asking about the history of the region. Did he ever mention anything about a water spring? The two elderly people exchanged glances before answering. He did, Mrs. Rose said carefully. He thought the drought in our region wasn't natural. What do you mean? Well, my dear, Mr. Jack leaned forward in his chair. My family has been here a long time. My father always said that when he was a boy, this region was quite green, had water in abundance. And what changed? The water company came here with promises to modernize everything, to bring development. My father, who was young at the time, believed them and sold part of the land to them. But after they settled in, the region started to dry up. Do you think the company did something to cause that? Mrs. Rose looked around as if afraid of being overheard. Dear, we don't have proof of anything, but the company has always had a lot of control over where the water goes and where it doesn't. And they've always been very interested in maintaining that control. If the spring on my property were reactivated, would that help you? Mr. Jack's face lit up. It would help a lot. Our land here is getting drier and drier. If we had natural water again, we could plant, raise animals, have a better life. So would you support the project to reactivate the spring? Of course we would, Mrs. Rose said with enthusiasm. If you need any help, you can count on us. Sarah left the visit feeling more confident. She had allies in the region, and that was important to resist the company's pressure. In the following weeks, Sarah, Anthony, and the children developed a work routine at the crater. Every morning they began careful excavations early, always documenting everything they found. Emily proved to be a valuable helper, with sharp eyes to detect anything unusual in the soil. Nathan helped by carrying tools and small rocks, while Ethan played under supervision. "Mom, look what I found!" Emily shouted one morning, holding something she had just unearthed. It was a piece of pottery with designs, apparently part of a very old filtering system. The old owners of the spring had a very sophisticated system, Anthony observed, examining the piece. "This here is part of a natural filter. They really understood what they were doing. Is that good for us? It's great. It means that when we find the main source, the water will already be naturally filtered and clean." That afternoon they received an unexpected visit. A well-dressed young man approached the house carrying a document folder. "Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Philip Hayes, attorney for Valley Waters. I'd like to speak with Mrs. Sarah Mitchell." Sarah dried her hands on a towel before greeting him. "Good afternoon, Doctor. How can I help you?" "Actually, I'm here to help you. Our company learned that you are conducting excavations on the property without the proper environmental permits." "What permits?" "Any work that could affect underground water resources requires specific authorization. I'm here to guide you through the correct legal process." Anthony approached the conversation. "Excuse me, Doctor, but basic research on private property does not require special authorization. I've worked in the field for decades and know the legislation well." The lawyer smiled coldly. "You may know the old legislation, but the rules have changed. Nowadays, any activity that could impact the environment is subject to strict regulation." "Doctor, could you show me specifically which law requires authorization for what we're doing?" Sarah asked. "Of course. It's all here in these documents." The lawyer opened the folder and took out several printed pages. Sarah tried to read, but the text was full of technical terms she didn't understand. "In summary," the lawyer continued, "you have two options: stop the excavations immediately or face a lawsuit for environmental crime. And if we stop the excavations, our company is prepared to offer fair compensation for the property, freeing you from any legal responsibility." Sarah felt her irritation grow. It was always the same thing: pressure to sell, threats, attempts at intimidation. "Doctor, I'll need time to analyze these documents carefully." "Of course, but don't take too long. The environmental agencies have already been notified about the irregularities here." After the lawyer left, Sarah sat down with Anthony to examine the papers he had left. "What do you think, Anthony?" "I think it's mostly a bluff. These laws exist, but they apply to large-scale commercial excavations, not what we're doing here. But they can complicate our lives through bureaucracy." "How?" "They can file complaints with the environmental agencies, request inspections, create processes that take months to resolve. Meanwhile, we're prevented from continuing the work." "So what do we do?" Anthony was thoughtful for a few minutes. "We speed up the work. If we can find the spring before they can legally stop us, then the situation changes completely." "Why?" "Because once the spring is operational and benefiting the region, it will be much harder for them to argue against it. Public opinion will be on our side." That night, Sarah could barely sleep. She felt she was in a race against time, but wasn't sure if she could win. The next morning, she woke to Emily gently shaking her shoulder. "Mum, there's a lot of noise outside." Sarah got up and looked out the window. There were 2 pickup trucks parked at the entrance to the property, and several men were heading toward the crater carrying equipment. "Mr. Anthony!" she shouted. The engineer, who was sleeping in the living room to help protect the property, woke immediately. "What is it?" "There are people messing with the crater." The 2 ran out of the house. Approaching the excavation, they saw the men dumping dirt and rocks into the hole, trying to fill it completely. "Hey, what are you doing?" Sarah shouted. One of the men, who seemed to be in charge, approached. "Court order, ma'am. You were served a work stoppage notice for environmental irregularities." "What notice? I didn't receive any notice." The man pulled a paper from his pocket. "It's right here, signed by the judge of the Three Peaks District." Sarah took the paper and tried to read it, but it was hard to understand all the legal language. "I don't understand. How can you stop work that hasn't even officially started? Ma'am, I don't debate court orders. I just carry them out. Mr. Anthony examined the document carefully. Sarah, this paper has irregularities. The case was filed yesterday and already judged today. That's not possible at the normal pace of the justice system. So what do we do? We'll have to file an urgent appeal, but in the meantime, they'll manage to fill the crater. Sarah looked at the men working quickly to dump dirt into the hole that David had spent years digging. All that research, all that dream, being destroyed before her eyes. "No!" she shouted. "You won't destroy my husband's work." She ran toward the crater, trying to stop them from continuing to throw dirt. Mr. Anthony followed her, trying to persuade her to be more cautious. "Sarah, they have a court order. If we resist, it could be worse for us." "But they're destroying everything. If they fill the crater now, we'll never be able to find the spring." At that moment, they heard the sound of more cars arriving. Sarah turned and saw several people approaching, Mr. Jack and Mrs. Rose, a few more neighbors, and even Mrs. Margaret from the fruit stand. "What's going on here?" Mr. Jack asked, seeing the men working at the crater. "They're trying to fill the crater with a fake court order," Mr. Anthony explained. "Fake how?" "The case was filed and judged on the same day. It's impossible at the normal pace of the justice system." Mrs. Margaret approached Sarah. "Honey, half the town knows that court order was bought. Valley Waters has a lot of power in the region, but they don't own everyone. What can we do?" "We can testify that this is an irregularity," Mr. Jack said. "If several local residents confirm the process was rigged, it will be harder for them to uphold the decision." One of the men filling the crater stopped working and addressed the group. "Folks, we don't want any trouble. We're just carrying out a legal order." "Legal, my ass," Mrs. Rose exploded. "Everyone knows you're being paid by the company to destroy the spring." "Ma'am, watch what you say. Unfounded accusations can cause problems for you." "Unfounded? Nothing." Mrs. Margaret jumped into the conversation. "I saw when the Valley Water Company men came to hire you. It was last Tuesday at Joe's Tavern. The man was embarrassed and went back to work. But now the group of residents was growing larger and larger, and it became clear they weren't going to let the destruction happen without a fight." "Sarah," Mr. Anthony said quietly, "even if we manage to stop this today, they'll be back. We need a better strategy." "What kind of strategy?" "We need a lawyer we can trust, someone who isn't involved with the company, and we need to better document everything we've found so far." "But where are we going to find a lawyer who has the courage to stand up to Valley Waters?" Mrs. Margaret approached again. "Dear, I have a nephew who's a lawyer in the capital. He has nothing to do with local politics. If you want, I can call him." "That would be great, Mrs. Margaret." "And there's one more thing," Mr. Jack said. "I have some old documents from when my father sold part of the land to the company. They might have useful information about how they gained control of the region." Sarah felt a wave of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had allies, people who had also been harmed by the company and wanted to see justice done. That evening, the group of residents managed to convince the men to stop the work of filling the crater until the legal matter was clarified. It wasn't a definitive victory, but at least they had bought some time. "Sarah," Mr. Anthony said when the others had left, "today was important. We showed we won't give up easily, but they'll come back with full force." "What should we do to prepare?" "First thing, speed up the excavations. If we can find the spring, it changes everything. Second thing, organize all the documentation we have. Third thing, find out more about how the company originally gained control of the region. And what if they come back before we can find the spring? Then we'll have to get more creative." That night, Sarah put the children to bed and sat down with Mr. Anthony to plan the next steps. Emily, always attentive, approached discreetly. "Mom, can I say something?" "Of course, honey." "This morning, before the men arrived, I saw something strange in the crater." "What was it?" "When the sun rose and lit up the bottom really well, I saw the ground was kind of wet in one specific corner. But the other corners were dry." Mr. Anthony was immediately interested. "Emily, do you remember which specific corner it was?" "Yes, I do. It was on the side where those old pipes are." Sarah and Mr. Anthony exchanged looks. It could be that the spring was closer to the surface than they imagined. Emily, that's very important. Tomorrow morning early, before anyone shows up, we'll take a look at that specific spot. At 5 o'clock the next morning, Sarah, Mr. Anthony and Emily went down into the crater with flashlights. Nathan was still asleep, and Ethan was in his mother's arms. "It's over there, Mr. Anthony." Emily pointed to the northeast corner of the excavation. When they got close to the spot indicated by the girl, Mr. Anthony crouched down and examined the ground carefully. "It really is damp, and look, there's a difference in color too." He took a small shovel and began to dig delicately at the spot. Just a few centimeters down, the earth became even wetter. "Sarah, I think we're very close." "Close to the spring?" "Close to the water. If we dig a few more handspans, it's likely water will start bubbling up here." Sarah felt her heart race. After weeks of work, they were finally close to their goal. "Then let's dig." "Easy. We have to do this very carefully. If we drill in the wrong place, we could damage the spring permanently." They spent the whole morning doing very careful excavations at the spot identified by Emily. The earth got wetter and wetter, and at times they could see small puddles forming in the hole. "Mr. Anthony, look!" Sarah pointed to the bottom of the small excavation they had made. A small amount of crystalline water was beginning to spring from the earth. "We did it!" Emily shouted with joy. "Easy, not yet," Mr. Anthony said, but he was visibly moved. "This is just the beginning. The main spring is still deeper down." But it was an encouraging start. For the first time, they had concrete proof that there was living water in that location. "And now?" Sarah asked. "Now we have to expand the excavation gradually, always following the flow of the water. It will guide us to the main source." At that moment, they heard the sound of cars approaching again. "Darn," Mr. Anthony said. "They're back." Sarah quickly climbed out of the crater to see who was arriving. This time there were 3 cars: the Valley Waters LLC pickup truck, an official government-plated car, and a passenger car. "Good morning, Mrs. Mitchell," said a man who got out of the official car. "I'm an inspector from the Department of Environmental Protection. I'm here to conduct an inspection of the property." "Inspection of what?" "We received a complaint about irregular activity regarding water resources. I need to examine the excavation site." Sarah looked at the Valley Waters LLC representative, who was clearly coordinating everything. "Inspector, may I see your identification?" "Of course." The document appeared legitimate. Sarah had no choice but to allow the inspection. "What exactly will you be checking?" "Whether there is environmental damage, risk of groundwater contamination, and compliance with environmental regulations for this type of activity." Mr. Anthony climbed out of the crater and introduced himself to the inspector. "Good morning. I'm a retired engineer, and I can explain technically what we're doing here." "Perfect. Let's go to the excavation site." The group headed to the crater. Sarah hoped the inspector would be impartial and could see they weren't causing any environmental harm. "Interesting," the inspector said, examining the excavation. "Are you trying to locate a natural spring?" "Exactly," Mr. Anthony replied. "We are unblocking a spring that was artificially capped decades ago." "And do you have documentation about this historical spring?" "We do. We even found an original plaque that proves the spring's existence in 1954. Mr. Anthony showed the plaque that Emily had found. The inspector examined it with interest. "St. Helena Spring, 1954, property of the Shepherd family," he read aloud. "This is important historical evidence." "Exactly," Sarah said. "We are merely restoring something that existed naturally." The inspector continued examining the area, taking notes on his clipboard. The Valley Waters LLC representative watched everything closely, with an increasingly concerned expression. "Inspector," the man from the company interjected, "regardless of the historical question, they don't have authorization to tamper with underground water resources. What would be the necessary authorization in this specific case?" the inspector asked. "Artesian well drilling permit, environmental impact study, water use grant." Mr. Anthony interrupted. "Excuse me, but an environmental impact study is only required for large-scale activities, and a water use grant is only necessary after proving the volume extracted. We are still in the research phase." The inspector nodded. The engineer is correct. For research activity on private property, there is no need for complex prior licenses. The company representative's expression visibly soured. But, Inspector, they are interfering with the regional groundwater. This could affect other properties. It could affect it positively, Mr. Anthony countered. A natural spring benefits the entire region. What negatively affects it is keeping a natural spring blocked. The inspector continued his inspection for another hour, examining every aspect of the work they were doing. In the end, he called Sarah and her Anthony for a private conversation. Look, technically, you're not committing any serious violations. It's a legitimate research activity on private property, but I'll have to report what I saw here. And what will the report say? Sarah asked nervously. That you're trying to restore a historic spring using appropriate methods without causing apparent environmental damage. But I recommend you seek the proper licenses as soon as possible to avoid future problems. Which licenses specifically? A water use permit as soon as you determine the spring's volume, and it's advisable to create a sustainable management plan for the source. Does that take a long time to get? If you have all the documentation organized, it might take a few months, but it doesn't prevent you from continuing the research in the meantime. Sarah felt relief. At least they wouldn't be forced to stop the work immediately. After the inspector and the company representative left, Sarah sat on the porch with her Anthony and the children. "We've won a battle, but the war isn't over," her Anthony said. "Why do you say that?" "Because the company won't give up. They'll try other methods to hinder us." "What methods?" "They could challenge the land ownership. They could claim the spring is part of the water system they control. They could create endless bureaucratic problems." "So what do? We accelerate the work even more. If we can prove the spring is functional and benefits the region, it will become much harder for them to attack us." That afternoon, they received the visit they were waiting for. Mrs. Margaret's lawyer-nephew had arrived from Denver to learn about the case. Dr. Paul Hayes was a young man, about 30 years old, with a determined air that inspired immediate confidence in Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell, my aunt told me the whole situation. I've read the documents she sent, and I can say you have a very strong case." "Strong how?" "First, you have legitimate ownership of the property. Second, you have historical evidence of the spring's existence. Third, you're not violating any environmental laws. The case is promising." "And what's the problem then?" "The problem is that you're facing a company with a lot of economic and political power in the region. They have the resources to make your lives very difficult, even if they don't have legal grounds." "So what should we do?" "Two things. First, organize a solid legal defense to protect your rights. Second, create accomplished facts that make it impossible to stop the project." "Accomplished facts?" "Make the spring effectively functional. Demonstrate that it benefits the community. Gain public support. Once that happens, it becomes politically very difficult for any judge or authority to stop the project." Her Anthony was interested in the strategy. "Doctor, how long do you need to organize the legal defense?" "About 2 weeks to prepare all the necessary documentation and file preventive requests with the court." "And how long do you think you need to make the spring functional?" "If we work intensively and don't face interference, maybe a week," her Anthony answered. "Then I suggest you work intensively this week, while I prepare the legal shield. If we can coordinate this well, you'll be in a very strong position to resist any pressure." Sarah felt a wave of hope. Finally, they had a coordinated plan with clear objectives and defined deadlines. "Dr. Paul, may I ask how much this legal defense will cost?" "Mrs. Mitchell, my aunt explained that you don't have many financial resources. I'll work pro bono on this case because I believe in your cause." "Pro bono? For free?" "I consider this a case of social interest. If we manage to reactivate the spring, the entire local community will benefit." That night, Sarah felt more optimistic than she had in weeks. They had a plan, they had legal support, they had allies in the community, and they were very close to finding the spring. "Mom," Emily said before going to sleep, "do you think Dad would be proud of what we're doing?" Sarah hugged her daughter tenderly. "I'm sure he would, my dear. We are finishing his dream. And when the spring is working, will our land turn green like in the old pictures?" "It will, Emily. And not just our land, but the whole region." The next morning began the most intense week since they had arrived at the property. Mr. Anthony organized a work schedule that would use every hour of sunlight. Sarah, let's divide the work. You and Emily will be responsible for documenting everything we find, taking photos, noting discoveries, organizing the findings. I will focus on the technical excavations. And the other children? Nathan can help by carrying small tools. Ethan can play in the shade, under supervision. The important thing is to keep the whole family involved in the project. The first day of intensive work brought encouraging results. Following the small water flow they had found, Mr. Anthony managed to pinpoint exactly where the main obstruction of the spring was. Sarah, come see this. She climbed down into the crater and approached the spot where Mr. Anthony was working. What is it? The obstruction isn't natural. Look here, there's concrete mixed with stones. Someone really plugged the spring on purpose. Is that good or bad for us? It's great. It proves our theory was right from the start, and it also means it's possible to remove the obstruction without damaging the source. How will we do it? Very carefully. I'll break the concrete piece by piece, always testing the water flow. It's delicate work but doable. In the following days, the work progressed quickly. Emily continued to be a valuable collaborator, always discovering details the adults missed. Mr. Anthony, look what I found over there. The girl had found more pieces of the original piping, which helped them better understand how the water distribution system worked. Emily, you have the eyes of an engineer, Mr. Anthony said admiringly. With these discoveries, I can reconstruct exactly how the spring originally functioned. On the fourth day of the intensive week, what everyone was waiting for happened. When Mr. Anthony removed a large piece of concrete, a gush of crystal-clear water sprang from the earth. "We did it!" Sarah shouted with joy. The water came out with considerable force, quickly forming a small pond at the bottom of the crater. "It's just the beginning," Mr. Anthony said, but he was visibly moved. "Now we need to clean the entire source and restore the distribution system." Emily climbed down into the crater and touched the water with her hands. "Mom, the water is really cold and clear." "That means it comes from deep down, straight from the water table," Mr. Anthony explained. "It's water of excellent quality." That afternoon, as they contemplated the water springing from the earth, Sarah felt an indescribable sense of accomplishment. David would be proud of what they had achieved, but the celebration was interrupted by the familiar sound of approaching cars. "Here they come again," Mr. Anthony said, looking toward the road. This time there were 4 cars, including one Sarah didn't recognize, a pickup truck of the type used by contractors. The group that got out of the cars was larger and more intimidating than the previous ones. Besides the familiar faces from Valley Waters, there were men who clearly were not office workers. "Mrs. Mitchell," said Manager Andrew, whom Sarah already knew, "we received information that you proceeded with the excavations despite the court injunction." "What injunction?" "The inspector was here and found no irregularities," Sarah replied firmly. "The suspension was not lifted. The inspector's visit was merely informational. Dr. Paul, the lawyer, had arrived the night before and was present for the conversation. Excuse me," he introduced himself. "I am Dr. Paul Hayes, attorney for the Mitchell family. I would like to see this suspension order you mentioned." Andrew hesitated before answering. "The document is being issued. It will be delivered officially soon." "So, at the moment, there is no suspension order," Dr. Paul said authoritatively. "Therefore, there is no legal basis to halt activities here. Doctor, regardless of legal matters, there are safety concerns. The excavations have destabilized the regional water table. There could be risks for neighboring properties." "How interesting," Mr. Anthony cut into the conversation, "because all the neighboring property owners support the project. Mr. Jack, Mrs. Rose, folks from town. No one has complained about any risk." At that moment, as if planned, Mr. Jack and Mrs. Rose appeared walking down the road toward the property. "Good afternoon, everyone," Mr. Jack greeted cheerfully. "We came to see how the work on the spring is going." "What spring?" Andrew asked, trying to seem surprised. "The St. Helena spring, which you blocked decades ago, and now Sarah managed to unclog," Mrs. Rose answered directly. "Ma'am, be careful with baseless accusations," one of the company men said threateningly. Baseless, my foot, Mrs. Rose retorted without flinching. Everyone from my generation knows what you did, and now that the spring is back, our land is already starting to get less dry. Dr. Paul saw the opportunity. Gentlemen from Valley Waters, are you listening? The local residents not only support the project, but are already benefiting from it. Any legal action against the Mitchell family would have to explain why a company wants to prevent a natural spring from benefiting the community. The tension in the air was palpable. Sarah realized they were at a decisive moment. Andrew, she said, addressing the manager directly, I'm going to make a proposal. How about we stop this war and find a solution that works for everyone? What kind of solution? The spring is working, benefiting the whole region. Instead of trying to hinder us, why not work with us to develop a sustainable water distribution system? And what would the company's role be in that? You have technical experience and infrastructure. We have the source. We can be partners instead of enemies. Mr. Anthony supported the idea. It's a reasonable proposal. The company keeps part of its role in the region, but now working with a natural source instead of against it. Dr. Paul also endorsed it. From a legal standpoint, a partnership would be far more advantageous for the company than a court battle they would likely lose. Andrew was visibly uncertain. It was clear the proposal interested him, but he would need to consult his superiors. I will need to discuss this possibility with the company's board. I can't make the decision alone. How much time do you need? Sarah asked. About 48 hours. Agreed. In the meantime, we continue working on the spring, and you suspend any legal action against us. All right. But if the board rejects the proposal, then we go back to the previous situation, Dr. Paul finished. But at least we tried a civilized solution. After the company people left, Mr. Jack patted Sarah on the back. Well played, my dear. You offered them a dignified way out. Now let's see if they're smart enough to accept it. And if they don't, Sarah asked, then we show that a working natural spring is worth more than any company, Mrs. Rose said with determination. During those 2 days of truce, Sarah, Mr. Anthony and the children worked intensely to improve the spring system. The water now flowed with steady force, and they began building simple channels to direct the flow. "Mom, look how much water!" Nathan exclaimed, seeing the amount now coming from the earth. "It really is a lot of water, son. Enough for our property and for several others, too." Emily was fascinated by the engineering project Mr. Anthony was developing. "How do you know where to place the pipes?" "I used the old pipes as a guide, Emily. The spring's first owners knew very well what they were doing. I'm just restoring their original system." By the end of the second day, the transformation of the property was already visible. The land around the spring turned green in a matter of hours. Small shrubs that were dry began to sprout new leaves, and even some birds appeared in the area. "It's amazing how quickly nature responds when it has water," Mr. Anthony observed. "And the neighbors, how are they reacting?" "Come see." They walked to the border of Mr. Jack's property. On his side, the land also showed signs of greater moisture. The groundwater spreads naturally. All the properties in the region will gradually benefit. That night, Sarah put the children to bed with a sense of duty fulfilled. Regardless of what the company decided, they had managed to realize David's dream. "Mom," Emily said before falling asleep, "when our land is all green, what are we going to plant?" "What would you like to plant?" "Pretty flowers to brighten up the place, and also food so we don't have to buy everything in town." "That's a great idea, sweetie. We'll make a beautiful garden and a big vegetable patch." On the morning of the third day, promptly at 10 o'clock, Andrew appeared alone at the property. His expression wasn't hostile like the other times. "Sarah, I've come to give you the board's answer about your proposal." "And what is the answer?" "They accepted the idea of a partnership, but with some conditions." "What conditions?" "First, the company maintains technical control over water distribution in the region. Second, the Mitchell family enters as a minority partner in the project. Third, all future development of the spring must be approved by the company." Sarah looked at Mr. Anthony and Dr. Paul before responding. "I need to discuss the details with my team before accepting." "Of course, but I can tell you it's a generous offer. You would start receiving a fixed monthly income without needing to worry about operational costs. And if we don't accept, then each goes their own way. You with the property and the spring, us with our business in the region. After Andrew left, Sarah met with Mr. Anthony and Dr. Paul to analyze the proposal. "What do you think?" she asked. "From a legal standpoint, it's a safe proposal," Dr. Paul said. "You would keep the property, have guaranteed income, and the company would assume the operational risks." But Sarah sensed there was a but in the lawyer's words. "But you would lose control over the project. The company could make decisions that wouldn't necessarily benefit the local community." "And what's your opinion, Mr. Anthony?" The engineer was thoughtful for a few minutes. "Sarah, I'll be honest. Technically, you don't need the company for anything. The spring is working. The distribution system can be simple, the operational costs are low. You can manage everything yourselves. Then why do they want a partnership? Because they know the spring will hurt their business. With abundant natural water in the region, no one will want to pay the high prices they charge. The partnership is a way for them to maintain some control over the situation." "Dr. Paul, what happens if we reject the proposal?" "Legally, they can't do much. You have all the rights to the spring, but they might try to complicate your lives in other ways." "What ways?" "Political pressure, excessive bureaucracy, creating difficulties for obtaining future permits. They have a lot of power in the region." Sarah looked out the window toward the spring, where Emily and Nathan were playing in the crystal-clear water that sprang from the earth. "You know something? David didn't start this project thinking about partnerships with companies. He wanted to benefit the community, and that's what we're going to do." "So you're going to reject the proposal?" Dr. Paul asked. "I am, and more than that, I'm going to propose something different to the company." "What?" "That they buy water from our spring at the same prices they charge consumers. They stay in business, but now as customers, not as controllers." Mr. Anthony smiled. "That's a brilliant idea, Sarah. They go from monopolists to being dependent on your spring. And if they don't accept this counter-proposal, then we set up our own distribution system. With the spring operational, it won't be hard to get community support." Dr. Paul nodded, approving the decision. "It's a courageous strategy, but legally sound, and it puts you in a position of strength in the negotiations." That afternoon, Sarah called Andrew and asked for a new meeting to present her counter-proposal. "Andrew, we appreciate the partnership offer, but we have a different proposal." "What proposal?" "The company can buy water from our spring to resell in the region. You keep part of the business, but now as buyers, not as controllers." Andrew's expression changed completely. "Sarah, this makes no commercial sense for the company. It would be more expensive than our current operation." "Only if you keep the abusive prices you charge today. With an abundant natural source, costs can be much lower." "But that would completely change our business model." "Exactly. Instead of artificially controlling scarcity, you would work with natural abundance." "I need to take this proposal to the board as well, but I'll say up front that the chances of acceptance are small." "No problem. If they don't accept, we set up our own system and you're completely left out." After Andrew left, Sarah sat on the porch watching the children play near the spring. She had made a decision that would completely change their lives, but she felt at peace with the choice. "Mum," Emily approached, "what's going to happen now?" "Now we're going to build the project your father dreamed of, honey, with our spring, our land, and our way of doing things. And if the company tries to get in our way, they can try. But now we have water, we have allies, we have a lawyer, and we have right on our side. That's more than enough to win any battle." That night, for the first time since arriving at the property, Sarah slept deeply, without worries. David's project was becoming a reality, and there was no force in the world that could stop a natural spring flowing for the benefit of an entire community. The following week, the company's response came through an official letter. They rejected Sarah's counterproposal and withdrew from any negotiation. But the letter also held a surprise. They gave up any legal action against the property. "Why do you think they gave up the legal actions?" Sarah asked Dr. Paul. "Probably because they realized they had no chance of winning, and also because a public battle against a widow trying to honor her deceased husband's project would be terrible for the company's image. So we're free to develop the spring our way. Completely free. You can do whatever you want with the property. In the following months, Sarah's property was completely transformed. The St. Helena Spring, as they had started calling it again, produced enough water to irrigate not only her land, but the neighboring properties as well. Mr. Jack and Mrs. Rose were the first to benefit. Their land, which had become almost unproductive due to the drought, turned green and fertile once more. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you," Mrs. Rose said, visiting the property one afternoon. "Our land hasn't been this green in over 20 years. "No need to thank me, Mrs. Rose. The spring is natural. It belongs to the whole region." Other neighbors also began requesting access to the spring water. Sarah, guided by her Anthony, developed a simple but effective distribution system. "How will we charge for the water use?" she asked. "We'll charge just enough to keep the system running. The goal isn't profit, it's sustainability." The price they set was a fraction of what Valley Waters LLC charged. Within a few months, almost the entire region had switched to the St. Helena Spring system. "Mom, look how beautiful our land has become," Emily exclaimed, running between the fruit trees they had planted. The property was truly unrecognizable. What was once dry, arid land was now a green oasis with gardens, a vegetable patch, an orchard, and even a small natural pond formed by the excess water from the spring. "Nathan, be careful not to fall into the pond," Sarah shouted, seeing the boy playing at the water's edge with Ethan. The children had adapted perfectly to their new life. Emily had become a little expert on plants and irrigation, always helping her Anthony with the system expansion projects. Nathan discovered a passion for taking care of the animals they managed to buy, some chickens, a pig, and even a milk cow. Ethan, now 2.5 years old, ran freely around the property, always happy and healthy. "Sarah," her Anthony said one afternoon as they watched the children playing, "your David would be proud to see all this." "I'm sure he would. Sometimes I feel he's here seeing the spring working and the land flourishing. And the best part is, this is just the beginning. With the system expanding, the entire region is going to transform." Indeed, the impact of the St. Helena Spring was being felt far beyond Sarah's property. Several families who had left the region because of the drought were returning. Small businesses were reopening. The local economy was beginning to reactivate. "Mrs. Mitchell," said Joe Anderson, the broker who on the first day had tried to convince her to sell the property, "I want to apologize for what happened when you first arrived here." "No need to apologize, Mr. Anderson. Everyone did what they thought was right at the time. It's just, well, I was receiving a commission from Valley Waters LLC to convince people not to mess with water issues. Now I see I was wrong." "And now?" "Now I want to help however I can. I have several clients interested in moving to the region because of the water abundance." Sarah smiled. Even the people who had initially opposed the project now wanted to be part of it. Dr. Paul continued helping with legal matters, but now the work was mostly positive. Officially registering the spring, obtaining operating licenses, establishing cooperatives for local producers. "Sarah, you've created a model that could be replicated in other regions of the country," he said during a visit. "How so?" "Artificially capped springs, communities dependent on monopolistic companies, dry land that could be fertile. The United States has hundreds of similar situations. Do you think we should try to help other communities?" "I do. But first, let's consolidate the project well here. Then we can think about expanding the help." 2 years after Sarah's arrival at the property, the transformation was complete. The St. Helena Spring had become famous in the region, attracting visits from students, researchers, and people interested in sustainability. "Mom," Emily said one morning, now 10 years old and even smarter, "what if we created an education center here?" "An education center?" "A place where people can come to learn about springs, sustainable irrigation, organic farming, things we learned by doing." Sarah was impressed by her daughter's idea. "That's a great idea, Emily. Let's talk to Mr. Anthony about it." The engineer loved the suggestion. "Emily, you keep thinking like an engineer. An education center would be perfect. We can teach other communities how to find and restore their own springs." And so the David Mitchell Environmental Education Center was born in honor of Sarah's husband. The center offered practical courses on water resources, sustainable agriculture, and community development. "Nathan, do you want to help with the courses too?" Sarah asked her son, now 7 years old. "I do. I can teach people how to care for the animals and plants." Even Ethan, now 4 years old, had his role at the center, always cheering up visitors with his contagious joy. "Come see my spring," he would say to anyone who arrived at the property, pulling visitors by the hand to the water source. The success of the education center brought recognition for Sarah's work. She was invited to give lectures at universities, participated in television programs about sustainability, and even received a National Environmental Preservation Award. "Sarah," said the host of a TV program, "what is the secret to the success of the St. Helena Spring Project?" "There's no secret," Sarah answered sincerely. "It's just about respecting nature and working for the benefit of the community, not for individual profit." "And what message do you have for other people facing similar problems?" "To never give up on their dreams. My husband David dreamed of this spring working. He passed before seeing the dream realized, but we managed to finish his work. When you fight for something just, you always find people willing to help." 5 years later, Sarah was sitting on the porch of the house, now expanded and renovated, watching Ethan play in the garden while Emily and Nathan helped Mr. Anthony with the center's courses. The property had transformed into something that surpassed even David's most optimistic dreams. Besides the main spring, they had discovered and reactivated 3 other smaller springs in the area. The land, which was once arid and unproductive, now sustained orchards, vegetable gardens, green pastures, and even a small forest they had planted to protect the springs. "Mrs. Sarah," shouted a familiar voice. It was Mrs. Margaret, now over 70 years old, but still active and involved in everything happening in the region. "Mrs. Margaret, how are you?" "I'm great. I came with news. My grandson, who lives in Oklahoma, wants to implement a similar project there. Can he use our experience as a model?" "Of course. The Education Center was created exactly for that. And there's other news. The Valley Waters Company is selling the regional facilities. It seems they can no longer compete with the natural spring water." Sarah smiled. The company that had tried so hard to stop the project was now leaving the region because it couldn't compete with what it had tried to destroy. "And do you know who's going to buy the facilities?" Mrs. Margaret continued. "Who?" "The local producers cooperative. They're going to use the infrastructure to further improve the distribution of the spring water." It was the final victory of David's vision over the commercial interests that had tried to stop his dream. That night, after putting the children to bed, Sarah walked alone to the main spring. By the light of the moon, the water sprang forth, crystal clear and abundant, as it had for billions of years before being capped, and as it would for many years to come. "David," she said softly, as if her husband could hear her, "we did it. Your spring is working, our family is thriving, and the whole region benefits. Thank you for dreaming all of this." A gentle breeze swayed the trees around the spring, and Sarah had the feeling that David was truly there, seeing the result of his visionary project. "Mom?" Emily appeared behind her. "Is everything okay?" "It's all perfect, my dear. I was just talking to your father. Can he hear?" Sarah hugged her daughter affectionately. "I'm sure he can, and I'm sure he's proud of everything we've managed to do." "Mum, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "Sometimes I talk to Dad too. I tell him about the spring, about the education center, about how happy our family is, and I feel like he really is proud." Sarah smiled with tears of joy in her eyes. "He is, Emily, and wherever he is, he knows his dream has come true and is helping many people." 10 years after Sarah's arrival at the property, the St. Helena Spring had become a national model for sustainable development. The David Mitchell Environmental Education Center had already trained over 1,000 people from across the United States who had replicated similar projects in their regions. Emily, now 18, had graduated in environmental engineering and was the center's technical coordinator. Nathan, 15, studied sustainable agriculture and managed the property's production. Ethan, 12, showed a natural talent for communication and helped by receiving visitors and explaining the project. "Mum," Emily said one morning, "I received an offer from the State University. They want me to coordinate a national spring restoration program. That's an incredible opportunity, dear. What do you think?" "I think it's the next natural step. Dad started with a dream here on our land. We made that dream come true and showed it works. Now it's time to take that hope to the whole country." Sarah looked at her daughter with immense pride. The 8-year-old girl who had found the first clue to the spring was now an engineer ready to multiply her father's legacy on a national scale. "You have my full support, Emily. Your father would be so proud to know his project will help the entire United States. What about the education center here? Nathan can take over the general coordination. I'll continue with the administrative part. Ethan helps with communication, and you come back whenever possible to supervise. We're a family, we'll keep working together even with you traveling." That afternoon, Sarah walked through the property, reviewing everything they had built over the years. The simple house was now a comfortable headquarters. The crater that once seemed like a problem was now a crystal-clear pond surrounded by gardens. The arid lands had transformed into productive orchards and green pastures. But the most important thing was the human impact. Dozens of families had returned to the region. Hundreds of people had learned at the education center. Thousands benefited from the abundant water from the restored springs. "Sarah!" Mr. Anthony called to her from the porch. Now 75, he remained active and enthusiastic about new projects. "What is it, Mr. Anthony?" "A delegation from Uruguay has arrived. They want to learn about our experience to replicate it there." Sarah smiled. David's dream had grown far beyond anything anyone could have imagined. "Let's give them a warm welcome. The more people learn about springs and sustainability, the better for the whole world." At the end of that day, while the Uruguayan delegation asked technical questions of Emily and her Anthony, Sarah sat on the porch watching Ethan teach the visiting children how to recognize the different sounds water makes when it springs from the earth. "Listen carefully," the boy said seriously. "When the water makes this sound here, it's because it comes from deep down. When it makes that sound over there, it's because it's passing through rocks. My family knows how to listen to the water speak." Sarah chuckled softly. Ethan had grown up hearing stories about the spring project and now passed on that knowledge with the ease of someone born knowing it. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Sarah took her traditional walk to the main spring. It was a ritual she had kept for years, a moment of gratitude and reflection at the end of each day. The water continued to flow strong and crystal clear, feeding the entire system that sustained the property and benefited the whole region. The sound of the spring was comforting, constant, eternal. "David," she said, as she did every night, "today your Emily was invited to coordinate a national program. Nathan is becoming an exceptional farmer. Ethan is growing up strong and happy. And our spring continues to give life to so many people." The wind gently rustled the trees around the spring, and Sarah felt that familiar sensation that David was present, approving of everything they had built together. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for starting all this. Thank you for leaving me the chance to finish your dream. And thank you for giving me such special children to carry on this legacy." 20 years later, Sarah was sitting on the porch of the property, now a 58-year-old woman watching her grandchildren play near the spring. Emily had married an engineer she met during the national program, and they had 2 young daughters. Nathan had married a teacher from the city and had a son. Ethan, now 22, studied environmental journalism and documented sustainability projects around the world. "Grandma Sarah," shouted the eldest granddaughter, Emily's daughter, "can I throw this little stone into the spring?" "Yes, you can, my dear. But first, listen to the sound the water makes." The girl crouched near the spring and listened intently. "Grandma, the water is happy today." Sarah smiled. The new generation was learning to connect with nature in the same way her children had. Her Anthony, now 85, continued to visit the property regularly, always with new ideas to improve the system or help other projects. "Sarah," he said, arriving for the Sunday lunch that had become a tradition, "we've received an interesting proposal. What proposal? The university wants to create a permanent research center here on the property. It would be linked to Emily's program, but would operate right here. And what would that mean for us? That the property would officially become a national reference center for spring restoration. It would have government financial support, research infrastructure, and ongoing training for technicians. Sarah became thoughtful. It was an honor and an opportunity, but also a great responsibility. "What do you all think?" she asked her children, who were gathered for lunch. "I think it's the natural next step, Mom," Emily said. "Dad started it as an individual dream. It became a community project, expanded into a national program, and now it can become an international reference." "And are you sure you can maintain the original essence of the project, even with all this formalization?" Sarah asked. "I am," Nathan answered. "The essence is to serve the community and respect nature. That doesn't change no matter how many official roles we have." "And I can document the whole process," Ethan said. "To film, photograph, tell the story so other people can be inspired." Sarah looked around the table, seeing her grown children, her grandchildren growing up, her Anthony always enthusiastic about new projects. It was a family that had formed around David's dream and kept growing. "All right. Accept the university's proposal, but on one condition, that you always keep it open to ordinary people, not just researchers. The spring is for everyone." "Of course, Mom. It's always been that way and always will be." 5 years later, the David Mitchell National Research Center for Community Water Resources was fully operational. Sarah's property had become a complex that included the research headquarters, laboratories, student dormitories, a conference auditorium, but always keeping the original spring as the heart of everything. "Professor Sarah," said a young researcher who had arrived from New York, "could you explain to me how you keep the water always so clean and abundant?" "There's no secret, my dear. It's just about not interfering with the natural process and sharing the water generously. The more you share, the more abundant it becomes." "But that's not scientifically possible." Sarah smiled patiently. She had explained this hundreds of times to researchers who arrived full of academic theories. "Young man, come with me to the spring. I'll show you something." They walked to the original source, where the water continued to flow with the same strength as ever, despite now feeding a much more complex system. "When we arrived here 25 years ago, this spring was blocked and the region was dry. We could have used the water only for our property, sold it at the highest possible price, controlled who had access. And why didn't you do that?" "Because my husband David dreamed of a spring that would benefit the entire community. The more families share this water, the more prosperous the region becomes. The more prosperous the region becomes, the more protected the spring is. It's a virtuous cycle." The young researcher became thoughtful. "So, technical sustainability depends on social sustainability." "Exactly. You cannot preserve a natural resource without taking care of the people who live around it." That night, Sarah took her traditional walk to the spring. At 63, she sometimes felt the weight of age, but the energy from that special water always renewed her. "David," she said, as she had every night for over 2 decades, "today I got news you would have loved." The wind rustled the leaves of the trees, as it always did when she talked to her husband. Emily was invited to be a UN advisor on water resources. Her project will influence water policies worldwide. Nathan developed an agricultural technique that tripled productivity without using more water. Ethan is making a documentary about springs that will air on national television. Sarah sat on a smooth rock near the source, listening to the comforting sound of water bubbling from the earth. And you know what's most beautiful? Your grandchildren are also growing up with a love for nature. Emily's eldest daughter wants to be a biologist. Nathan's son spends all day caring for the animals. Even Ethan's youngest, who is only 3, already knows that water is sacred. An owl hooted somewhere in the small forest that had grown around the spring over the years. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like if you were here physically, seeing all this we've built. I'm sure you would be proud, but I also know your presence is in every drop of this water, in every tree we planted, in every person who benefited from the project. Sarah stood up and gently touched the water of the spring. Thank you, David, for dreaming all of this, for starting when it seemed impossible, for giving me the honor of continuing your work, and for giving me such a special family to care for this legacy. 30 years after arriving at the property, Sarah was celebrating her 70th birthday, surrounded by a family that had grown far beyond her most optimistic dreams. Beyond her children and grandchildren, there were great-grandchildren, sons-in-law, daughters-in-law, and dozens of people who considered themselves part of the Mitchell family for having benefited from the Spring Project. "Grandma Sarah," said the eldest great-granddaughter, daughter of Emily's granddaughter, "tell the story again of how great-grandfather David discovered the spring." It was the third time that day someone had asked for the same story, but Sarah never tired of telling it. "Well, my dear, your great-grandfather David was a visionary man. He looked at this dry land and saw the potential hidden beneath the surface." As Sarah told the story once more, she observed the people gathered around. There were 3 generations of the Mitchell family, former students from the education center who had become renowned researchers, neighbors who had prospered thanks to the spring water, government officials who came seeking inspiration for public policies. And when the first water sprang from the earth, Sarah continued the story. Your great-grandmother Emily, who was 8 years old at the time, was the first person to touch the water and declare it was cold and clear. "And today, I'm 8 years old too," said the great-granddaughter, very proud of the coincidence. "And you also have your great-grandmother Emily's clever eyes. I'm sure you'll discover important things when you grow up." After the party ended and everyone had left, Sarah found herself alone at the property for the first time in years. Her children had insisted she spend the night in the city, at one of their houses, but she preferred to stay. "I need to talk to David in peace," she had explained. Now at 70 years old, walking slowly to the spring under the starlight, Sarah felt it was time for a special conversation with her husband. "David," she said, sitting on the stone where she always sat, "today marks 30 years since I arrived here with the children. Do you remember how everything seemed impossible at first?" The sound of the spring water seemed more musical than ever on that quiet night. Sometimes I wonder if you imagined the project would grow so much. From a family spring, it became a national research center. From an individual dream, it became public policy. From a local story, it became a worldwide example. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the night breeze touching her face. "But do you know what I'm most proud of? It's not the institutional success. It's not the awards we've won. It's not the international recognition. It's seeing that our family remains united around the values you planted. Emily works for sustainability all over the world, but always returns here. Nathan prospers in agriculture, but always shares his knowledge. Ethan travels documenting environmental projects, but always with his heart here at the spring." A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Sarah smiled. "And the grandchildren and great-grandchildren are growing up with the same values. Love for nature, generosity with the community, persistence in the face of difficulties. You planted seeds that keep germinating generation after generation." Sarah stood up and walked to the edge of the spring, now surrounded by a careful garden that did not interfere with the water's natural flow. "David, I think our main mission is accomplished. The spring is secure, the family is united, the community is prosperous, and the example is being replicated all over the world. I can rest in peace knowing everything will continue to flourish." That night, Sarah slept the most peaceful sleep of her life, and the next morning, when Emily arrived to visit her as she did every weekend, she found her mother still sleeping with a serene smile on her face. "Mom?" Emily called softly, but Sarah did not answer. She had passed away in her sleep peacefully after an entire life dedicated to realizing and expanding David's dream. Sarah Mitchell's funeral gathered over 1,000 people from across the United States and several countries. Researchers, farmers, students, politicians, neighbors, family, all wanted to pay tribute to the woman who transformed a seemingly useless crater into a source of life for thousands of people. "Mum always said the spring belonged to the whole community," Emily said during her speech at the wake. "Today we understand that she also belonged to the community. Sarah Mitchell did not own the spring. She was its guardian. Now that responsibility passes to all of us. Sarah was buried in a small cemetery on the property, near the original spring, beside David. On the simple headstone there was only an inscription: Sarah and David Mitchell, guardians of the St. Helena Spring, dreamed of water for all. In the months that followed, the family decided to keep everything running exactly as Sarah would have wanted. The research center continued its activities. The education center kept receiving visitors. The spring continued to nourish the entire region. "Grandma Sarah is here with us," said the great-granddaughter during a visit to the grave. "I feel her in the water, in the trees, in the wind." "Yes, she is, my dear," Emily replied, with tears of longing and gratitude. "Grandma Sarah and Grandpa David are here forever, watching over the spring and our family." Years later, when the David Mitchell National Research Center for Community Water Resources completed half a century of activities, an international delegation visited the property to document the project that had inspired hundreds of similar initiatives around the world. "How did you manage to keep the project running for so long?" asked a researcher from the Netherlands. "We kept the original values," Ethan answered. Now in his 50s, he was the center's communications director. Generosity, sustainability, and community unity. As long as we don't lose that, the project stays alive. "And what is the center's future?" "The same future as the spring," Sarah's great-granddaughter replied. Now a 25-year-old young engineer, she coordinated the technical projects to keep bubbling forth clean water to benefit the entire community forever. That afternoon, after the delegation left, the family gathered near the spring for the ritual they had maintained since Sarah's passing, a moment of gratitude and renewal of commitments. Great-grandfather David, Grandma Sarah. The great-granddaughter spoke on behalf of everyone. "We promise to continue caring for your spring. We promise to keep the water clean, the community united, and the dream alive." The water kept bubbling forth, crystal clear and abundant, as it had for billions of years before being covered, as it had in the decades since it was restored, and as it would forever, an eternal symbol that generous and persistent dreams always find a way to come true. The St. Helena Spring became more than a water source. It became a symbol of hope, proof that a united family, with solid values and determination, can turn the impossible into reality and create a legacy that benefits entire generations. End of story. What an emotional story. Sarah proved that with determination and love, it is possible to turn the impossible into reality. Now tell us in the comments, do you believe Sarah made the right decisions throughout the journey? What stood out to you most in this story? Write your opinion with sincere words. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel.